Is it possible that the first time when you run a half marathon, the first time you run an official race, you can do that in less than 2 hours? A lot of people aspire to this. The 2 hour mark is kind of seen as a benchmark for being a decent runner. And also it's a nice round figure, so us humans like it. So is it possible? Well, of course, technically it is, but I want to share my own learnings and experiences about how I did it, and did it in a way in which makes me want to go back for more. So I'm going to share all of my tips and experiences broken down into several different areas of preparation, nutrition, on-the-day experience. So let's get into it. I'm going to use a whiteboard. Now, normally, if you subscribe to this channel, you will be expecting a technical video about cloud and cloud networking. Well, this isn't a technical video, so apologies if you were expecting that. If you're not interested in nutrition and running and health and fitness, then probably switch off now. But in the past, I have released videos on this channel which have been a little bit off trend. I released one on breaking my foot a while ago. And actually, I found that quite a really sort of useful experience. I shared my own learnings. A lot of people, thousands of people found that helpful. So I'm kind of here to do that again with the aspect of running. I do think there is a link to productivity, a link to working in a technical environment. You know, if you are pursuing a goal in a certain way outside of work and you're maintaining your health and fitness, there's definite carry over there to a professional environment, clarity of mind, etc. I want to call out that, yes, I'll be talking about nutrition, exercise, etc., but I'm neither a qualified doctor or a medical professional, so please take this with a grain of salt. It's just my own anecdotal experience. So can you run it in less than 2 hours? Well, of course you can. Many people do this. And here's my time. So this is 1 hour 58, and I was super happy with that. Just to reiterate again, that I've never, before running this race a couple of weeks ago, I've never ran more than 13.1 miles in my life. In fact, the longest run I did before the actual race day was about 8 miles. And that approach might seem a little bit unorthodox, and I was a little bit dubious. I didn't really know what was going to happen, but here I am to sort of tell the tale, and hopefully that helps other people. Here we see the recording from my Apple Watch. So a similar sort of time, similar sort of distance, and we're going to get into some of these metrics around things like heart rate, cadence and pace. Just as a bit of context, I mean, depending on who you are and how much experience you've got with running, you might be looking at this thinking, oh yeah, that's something that I really aspire to, or oh wow, that's really too fast. Or you might be thinking, oh, you know, I do 7-minute mile pace. What's this guy talking about? Of course you can run that fast. That's jogging for me. And of course the world record is nearly an hour. So there's a huge spectrum of what can be done here in terms of timing. But again, the 2 hour mark is seen as a good sort of thing to aim at if you're kind of, you know, getting into running. Maybe you've been doing it for a while. I think the average pace for a half marathon across everyone that runs one, including all the club runners, all the professional runners, and everyone that, you know, might take longer than 2 hours, is about 2 hours 2 minutes. There's a great article here on the Run Repeat website which breaks down loads of interesting statistics about marathon times across the decades by gender, and when you dig into this inside of this webpage, that's where you get the 2 hour 2 minutes figure. So just how fast is 13.1 miles in 2 hours? Well, if you are getting into running, you're probably going to start tracking your how many minutes does it take me to run a mile pace. And if you're not really familiar with this terminology, it can sort of be a bit alien, but to give you an idea, the fastest sort of people in the world are running, sprinting the 4-minute mile. That's kind of the whole Roger Bannister story about him breaking that for the first time. Between 4 and 5 minutes is what Kipchoge ran for his 2 hour marathon. What you need to run for a half marathon in 2 hours is 9 minutes, 9 seconds per mile pace. And this is sometimes referred to as middle of the pack running. So, and that certainly reflects my experience on the day. So when you are out there, you have a lot of people behind you at this pace. You'll also have a lot of people in front of you. I think it's a good area to be in terms of there's people to motivate you from both front and behind. As I said before, it's aspirational for some, but for most club runners, this is going to be very much a slow training pace. But as I also said, it's below the average. So it's below the average, which includes all of those professional runners. So we are aiming to be above average effectively in terms of pace. So we are aiming to be above average in terms of pace for our first ever half marathon, which I think is why the question around this sometimes gets asked. Here's a cheesy picture of me at the end of the race with my medal and my children. I finished the race and I didn't feel terrible. We'll get into some of the race day experience in a second. And this is a sharp contrast for me when I think to how I was thinking 5 months ago when I booked the half marathon. So literally 5 months ago, my genuine thought was I could never ever run a 2-hour half marathon. And that's because when I look at my pace from 5 months ago, I was generally doing most of my runs in the sort of 10 to 12 minute per mile pace. And even when I did my faster runs, maintaining this 9 minute, 9 second per mile pace felt unsustainable 5 months ago. So one of the things I'll share is that your pace can improve quickly if you stick at it. So one approach to running the 2-hour half marathon, and unfortunately I think this is the approach that most people take, is they do the training and they just kind of go for runs and maybe follow a run plan off the internet, and then they go into the actual race day potentially unprepared and they just run it. And what that means is you try and do something on race day which is sort of way beyond what you normally do in training, but you just use the euphoria and the anticipation of the race day and the fact that it's a one-time event. You just kind of, you grind through it. And based on what I saw of a lot of people there, a lot of people were really not enjoying the experience of running the half marathon. There was a lot of people who were really puffing and panting, really struggling with the heat on the day. So that is one approach. I mean, if you just want to do it and just to say I did a less than 2.5 hour marathon, then by all means just get out there and try and grind it out, sort of David Goggins style, just mind over matter. That's definitely one approach. But the approach that I want to communicate in this video is that I really wanted to go into that event and come out of it thinking, okay, I want to do that again. That was enjoyable, and I want to think that I can go potentially further next time. So I'm going to talk about this spider's web of how I broke it down into these 5 different categories of running often, running slow, the logistics on the day, the gear that I use, the equipment, etc., nutrition, and then the actual race day experience itself. So let's get into it. The first area, and if you take away anything from this video, I think this is the most important area. This is the thing that really moved the needle for me. And this is the concept of Zone-2 or Maffetone training. So you could talk for hours and hours about this training. There's books written on it. There's hundreds of podcasts out there. The idea of Zone-2 training is becoming more and more popular. But to give you the sort of elevator pitch, it says that most of your runs should be at a relatively comfortable pace. We have these idea of different zones when we run. Zone 1 being the sort of lowest amount of effort. Zone 5 being all out, sprinting heart rate at the maximum. A very crude way of working out your Zone 2 is to take away your age from 220. So for me, that's roughly 180, and then take 80% of that. So for me, that would be 36 away from 180, which is about 144. So 144 beats per minute in terms of my heart rate would be the top of my Zone 2. And I must state that's a low resolution view of working out Zone 2. The actual technical definition of Zone 2 is when you're operating at a level of exertion where your body is able to clear the amount of lactate that you're generating. So lactate is not building up too high in your body, right? So when we run and we exercise, our body needs to generate energy. Generally, you want to do that aerobically, which means you're taking in oxygen and that's going into the muscles and the mitochondria are doing work. And that's sustainable, right? Generally in that zone, you're using more of your fat reserves for energy, less so the glucose in your blood. So that's where we talk about building the aerobic base. So really it comes down to how efficient is your engine. When I first started out with my Zone 2 focus, I'd go out for a run and I'd try and maintain my status in Zone 2, so keep my heart rate around about 130 to 140. and I had to run at a pace of, say, 11, 12 minutes per mile. It was quite frustrating. You know, I could go faster, but I had to maintain my heart rate. And it was important to do that because you're effectively in a sustainable state at that point. Your body is not generating too much lactate, which means your muscles are going to stay effective for a longer period of time. You're going to be using your fat reserves. So it's not super important to concentrate on how much glucose you've got in your system. So I like to run fasted in the morning. So again, this concept of zone 2 and using your fat reserves rather than your glucose was kind of important to me. So for me, I translate zone 2 as, well, I need to be fairly strict with my pace. You know, I want to do most of my runs in zone 2. So pretty much all of my runs I do in zone 2 actually. I know some people advocate do a bit of zone 5 training to increase your VO2 max as well, but VO2 max is not something I concentrate on a lot. It's something I track, but not something I concentrate on a lot. Frequency, well, I like to run every morning, so I run about a 5k every morning. Maybe I'll do another video in the future on frequency. And in terms of volume, that translates to about 100 miles per month. So in terms of building that zone 2 base, what worked for me was 6 months of running about 100 miles per month at relatively steady pace. So when we pull all of this together, what we're really aiming to do is give our body a good amount of time in zone 2. So we're talking 3, 4, 5 hours, if not more, per week. As I say, I interpret that in a pattern that works for me, which is about half an hour each morning. You could probably optimize that. There's some science that says if you do longer sessions, it's better, but for my morning routine, that wouldn't work. And by spending that time in zone 2, that's where we increase the mitochondrial density, we increase our body's ability to use our fat reserves, and we increase our body's ability to clear lactate. And if we do all of those things over a sustained period of time, that becomes our baseline. The output, hopefully, is what I was aiming for, which is to run a sub 2 hour half marathon feeling okay, feeling like I enjoyed the experience, feeling like I want to go back for more, feeling like I can take this further in the future, and thinking it's a sustainable thing that I want to continue for the rest of my life. There's a saying in American football, which is your primary thing you want to concentrate on in your career is staying injury free. Right? You can get better and you can maintain an income as long as you stay injury free. And that's the same thing for marathon preparation. You want to put this above all else. And one of the things that zone 2 training does is, you know, it doesn't mean that you're blasting yourself every day. So I do believe that this sensible approach to pacing yourself lets you stay injury free. As I said, I wanted to enjoy the experience. I didn't want to be grinding my way around the 2 hours. So here's a shot of me sort of halfway through the race. And although I've taken the best one of a few captures that was done on the day, I think it's evident from this that, you know, I'm not absolutely killing myself. I did actually really enjoy the experience of the day. I think that's because I wasn't doing something which was 50% harder than what I would normally do day to day. And I think I attribute a lot of that to the zone 2 Maffetone approach and just the frequency of time I spent running at a pace that wasn't too dissimilar by the end of my training to that which I ran on the day. Just a brief word on logistics. I wanted to make sure that it was low effort. So I chose a race which I could walk to. It was near my house, no messing around with cars and lockers, etc. The race wasn't particularly hilly. It sort of replicated what I would normally run in the morning. That let me get some decent sleep. There was no change in sort of having to wake up super early or go to bed early. And that was important for me. And then when it came down to silly things like where do you put your phone? Well, I left it at home. Water provided on the day. Keys, I left it at home. And then a back out plan. I genuinely wasn't sure if I could even run the 13 miles, but I knew because it was a local race, if I got to 10 miles and I had to stop, well, not the end of the world, right? You could just ask somebody to call you an Uber or just walk home. So I think, yeah, be sensible about choosing the right race. Let's talk a little bit about the gear and equipment. Well, it was a really hot day, probably the hottest day that we've had this summer. So by about 11 o'clock, it was 28 degrees centigrade, which for the UK is extremely hot. I think it hit 32 degrees that day. So for me, thinking about what I was going to wear was important. I was thinking, oh, should I wear a vest? But I've never worn a vest before, so I stuck with a t-shirt and it was fine. We have this saying in marathon preparation, which is never new on race day, so don't do silly things which you haven't done in your prep. So for example, I considered, should I take my phone in case I had to call my wife? Again, no. If you haven't run with a holder before, don't do it on race day. I always run with a cap on, so again, this for me was kind of, okay, just run with a cap on, make sure you're wearing sun cream. Let's talk a little bit about shoes. So shoes have made a massive difference for me. When I started my running casually a few years ago, I would just throw on any old pair of Nike shoes that I had. About 8 months ago, maybe a year ago, I got a local running shop to do some gait analysis on me, and it was pretty clear I needed a certain type of shoe, and they got me fitted, and we eventually landed on these Saucony shoes, which seemed to feel really good. So I run in the Saucony Ride 15s. So they're a specialist sort of running brand, about £100 or $140 per pair. But it made such a big difference to me. I had a few niggles with my knees before then and my hips, but having the right shoe with the right heel to toe drop, I think these shoes might even have some sort of nylon plate in the middle, which helps with the energy return. My main takeaway here is, running shoe technology has come on absolutely leaps and bounds in the past 8 years. So you really want to take advantage of this. It's like night and day running in a good pair of shoes. Make sure you're swapping them out at regular intervals, every 500 miles or so. The foam's going to be worn out. So if you're running 100 miles a month and you're doing your Zone-2 training, then you're going to be getting through 2 or 3 pairs a year. I do also want to flag the walking aspect of this. A lot of people that do running also like to walk to supplement that, and I generally go out for a walk most days. And what I found was getting the same pair of shoes that I run in, which are like not a racing shoe, just kind of like a middle of the road training shoe. I bought a pair of them in black to do my normal walking in, and I found that really beneficial because it had the same sort of support and feel. So when I went for a run, it just felt really natural. Didn't apply to me on my race day, but think about rain in terms of shoes. So if you get some shoes and you wear them and get used to them in the dry, one thing that you might find is if you go out for a run in the rain, this is really common, on the front of the shoe, they might flick water up onto your toe, and then you'll get wet socks, and over 2 hours, that's going to be really annoying and can really affect your pace. So make sure you test your shoes in the rain, and if that is a problem for you, then you can get shoes that are designed for wet weather. So for example, the Saucony brand that I run in, I've got an additional pair of shoes from them, which are the same style of shoe, but they call them the Shield version. So they've got a slight rubberized Gore-Tex layer on the outside, which you really don't want to be using that in the hot weather because it traps in the heat. But in the cold winter weather, it's got a nice lining and it keeps the weather out. And then all these pretty graphs that we'll get into, they come from Apple Health. I run all of my runs with an Apple Watch, and for the distances that I do, it's perfectly fine. You can use your Apple Watch up to a marathon. If you've got a modern Apple Watch, that will be sort of 50% battery for a full marathon. And I find the data logging aspect absolutely critical to Zone-2 training. So I don't think you can do it without some sort of smartwatch. Somebody asked me, do you get bored in those 2 hours? Do you get bored in your runs every morning? Do you use music? And for me, the answer is no, for mainly 2 reasons. One is I don't want to feel like I need the music to run. Sometimes you won't have the ability to have your music with you. I don't want to have to carry a phone, so I'd have to preload music onto my watch, which is a bit of a faff. And then also, again, nothing new on race day. So really, you don't want to be having music on you on a race day so you can pay attention to the marshals, etc., enjoy the experience. So again, I didn't want to go into race day in a completely different position to my runs. And to be honest, I kind of enjoy those runs in the morning. So you have half an hour every morning where it's just you and the road, no external stimulus. It lets your brain wander. And I think it lets you, get your thoughts in order. Just on the subject of the Apple Watch, I'm going to zoom in on some data here, which is super interesting. So here on the right-hand side, I've got one of my typical morning runs where I run my 5K or sometimes a little bit further. And you can see this is from 5 days before the half marathon. And this was a typical sort of pace for me. So I would typically run at roughly 9 minute per mile pace. So pretty much bang on what I needed for the half marathon in 2 hours. And my average heart rate was normally about 130. So as I said, 5-6 months ago, this pace would have been near 11 minutes per mile. But with the Zone-2 training, sticking at it, doing it every day, and making that engine more efficient, my heart was able to beat at the same beats per minute, but my output was able to be a lot higher. And that's a combination of my body's ability to take in oxygen more efficiently, a stronger heart, probably the ventricles have got potentially slightly more muscular, but also stronger. So every beat of the heart pushes more blood, but also that mitochondrial function improves massively when you first start this type of training. My preparation here, I was thinking, oh yeah, I'm going to aim for race day. I want to keep my heart rate around about 130. One of my key learnings I want to share with you is that, well, we say nothing new on race day, but race day is a new thing to you if you've never done it before. And most people's bodies to new events act with a degree of nervousness, anxiety, excitement. Those three emotions all come from the same part of the brain, and they are intrinsically linked to an increase in adrenaline and an increase in heart rate. So what I saw on the day of the half marathon is even from when I woke up, and normally I wake up and my heart rate's like 45, 50 beats per minute, straight from the get-go, my body was like, okay, I know something different's going on here. And that carried all the way through to the race. So even walking to the start line, my heart rate was at 110, 120. And I was thinking, well, I'm probably not going to be running 130 beats per minute today. And that was true. So you can see my pace was kind of similar. Yes, it was a hot day, but my heart rate was massively over where it normally is. Normally, if I'm running at 153 beats per minute, I'm running near an 8 minute per mile pace, 750 pace. So one of my learnings here is like, yes, you might use your Zone-2 for preparing, but if it's your first time, your body's probably going to be in this state of fight or flight, and that's going to elevate your heart rate. And what did we say earlier? That's going to change how your body generates energy. So this had me quite worried initially because, as I said, I always run fasted. I never eat before a run, and I never ate before this half marathon. And because my heart rate was elevated, I'm going to be using much more glucose from my body during the run. So even though the previous day I ensured I was well hydrated, well fed, etc., I didn't have any sort of gels on me, but I was sort of thinking, okay, I'm not in Zone-2 here, I'm in Zone-3, Zone-4. Am I going to deplete my glucose stores? And if you've done any sort of endurance events before, you know that when you deplete your glucose stores or when you hit your lactate thresholds, there's a feeling that you get which is just, I feel like death, and I really didn't want to get to that point. So one of the things I did when I noticed that, well, okay, despite my best efforts, I'm going to be above Zone-2 here, as I was going around the course, I took full advantage of the gels that people were handing out and the jelly babies. So loads of these amazing people in our local area came out to see the marathon, and they handed out tubs of jelly babies. So I probably had 350 calories worth of sugar going sort of from the midway point. And probably if my body was operating perhaps more anaerobically and using more glucose, then probably that sugar in my blood helped. Because I think if maybe I was to push it even further and try and run a marathon fasted with this high heart rate, I might have some issues. So there's probably some interesting learning there, which is, when you get used to the race day, you can probably be more closer to your baseline in terms of Zone-2. but this is one to watch out for. So we've covered a little bit of the nutrition side of things. As I said, I like to run fasted. If I eat before I run, I just feel sick and I get cramp. And it also helps with my clarity of thinking whilst I'm running. When you dig into some of the literature around hydration, if it's a hot day, of course, it's important to hydrate when you're going around the course, but the hydration the day before is super important. So make sure that the day before the race, you've got plenty of water in you. The morning of, get some electrolytes into you. I always like to have a bit of caffeine before I run. And as I said, the gels, etc. I wasn't planning on doing that, but I think that might have helped me. And that probably brings you on to another tip, which is, do check the weather. So most of my training runs that I did in the mornings were in typical morning weather here in the UK, it was between 1 degree in winter in the morning, 1 degree centigrade, to in spring normally it's about maximum 13, 14 degrees, in summer 15, 16 degrees. But on the day I was running in 28 degree weather, which I wasn't used to. So if that picture earlier showed me doing pretty well halfway, you can see me here after a little sprint finish. I mean, visibly, it's a hot day. Everyone is struggling. And so was I after doing a bit of a sprint finish to the end there. So again, make sure you're taking in enough water. Let's talk a little bit about technique. This is one tip which I would love to communicate to other people and really, really help me. So when you go for a run normally, if you're just starting out running, imagine if that's your foot. So you've got your toes down here and you've got your heel over here. Most people, when they go for a run, when they first start off running, they land heel first. So this part of the foot, or this part of the foot, and trainer or sneaker hits the tarmac first. That's kind of how most people generally run in most modern running shoes. You get some people who run professionally who run like this and are successful. But what I found was when you look into the actual technique side of things, I mean, I've never had a coach, etc., but in some sense, everyone's got free coaching with the advent of YouTube, etc. When you dig into the technique side of things, you can make a really strong case for bringing that strike point down towards the midfoot and potentially towards the outside of the forefront. So there's this kind of sweet spot here. And there's some biomechanical reasons for that in terms of the energy return and the strain on your body. So what I certainly found, sort of like a really sort of simple heuristic for me, was I imagine I've got a triangle that runs from the middle of my foot down to the middle of my toes, out to the outside of my forefoot, and then back here. So when I'm running, under normal conditions, my safe place and my favourite area of running is I make sure this area of my foot strikes the ground first. And it just feels much more elegant, less stressful on my body, and actually translates to a much faster pace, for me anyway. As soon as I implemented this technique, things just clicked. So check out the videos on YouTube around forefront running. I think that might really help you. What I would say though is don't get rid of heel running altogether in your mind, because you might have periods in the race where you are sort of feeling it, you're tired, or you're going down a super steep hill or over treacherous terrain. And there are some times where you need to revert back to heel running. But I kind of like this from a sort of strange mental perspective, that I kind of viewed it like I had different modes of operation. I could, and that helped me get through the sheer amount of time that you're running for. Sometimes you're in the red zone, sometimes you're in the purple zone, and there is actually kind of another zone which you could think about, which is where you're really on your toes. So you can sort of almost like a gazelle. And I never really run like this. I think some professional sprinters do, but if I'm running and I need to sprint really fast across the road to get through traffic, you can get up onto your toes and you'll feel yourself sort of feel like a coiled up spring, but you can't maintain it for very long because your hamstrings will burn out. I think maybe professional runners have overcome the latter, and maybe that's why they're so fast, but that's just a complete spitball. Okay, let's think a little bit about race day tactics. Pacing. Well, as I said, you need to do 9 minutes, 9 seconds on average per mile. That doesn't mean you have to do every mile at 9 minutes per 9 seconds. Now, when you sort of dig into the meta studies, people say don't overcomplicate it. You know, if you can roughly do every mile at 9 minutes, 9 seconds, that's probably the best approach. What I did in my head was I said, okay, I'm going to do the first 6 miles or so, 6.5 miles in near enough the pace that I need to do. So about 9 minutes per, and then I'm going to try and run the last half a bit quicker, which is what I did. My average pace for the last half was probably near 8 minutes 45. And this is called reverse splitting. And if you can do that, that's normally another good sign that you've prepared well, you enjoyed it. Because, you know, if you think about the opposite, if you think that you start off running pretty fast and then you go downhill massively, that's probably representative of, well, you were struggling towards the end and you had to grit your teeth to get through it. Depending on the race, you might have pacers. And I found this really interesting because I wasn't aware this was a thing, but in our race, there was people who ran with big signs above their head saying like, keep up with me and you're on 2 hour pace, or keep up with me and you're on 1 hour 50 pace. And I find that quite useful. So one of my things was, well, I got to make sure the guy with the 2 hour banner's behind me. And of course, that's what I did. And the last tip I'll share with you is, again, about things that you get on race day that you wouldn't otherwise get. So just being around other people running, I found super motivating. The camaraderie and the general atmosphere was a really positive thing. But then also the sort of competitive angle, right? If you've got someone up ahead of you, you think, oh, I might try and catch him or her. And yeah, I found that really really interesting dynamic, along with the crowd. It's very easy to stop running when you're by yourself for little reasons. It's not quite as easy to stop running when you've got 100 people watching you, or people that have come out of their own houses and sat on their own lawns just to watch everyone. You really don't want to let them down, so you don't want to stop in front of them. So don't underestimate the crowd, right? We talk about it being the 12th man in football or soccer. Well, in the race, you will definitely use that to your advantage, I think. Okay, well, I hope you found that useful. Like I say, don't take it too seriously, this video. Like, probably I've missed some things, and hopefully you've got your own comments which you can drop below. I'd say the main thing which I think moved the needle for me was the discovering Zone-2. So if the only thing you take away from this video is I've left you some breadcrumbs to go and research these terms, then great. I think that's a great win. All of the other bits and bobs here are going to be kind of personal to you, but hopefully by me sharing these, it might have helped you. So if you are preparing for your first half marathon, I wish you the best of luck, and go and smash that 2 hour time. Thanks a lot.